So we're talking about Lawrence Wright's latest novel, The End of October, and how it was the best of times and the worst of times. The worst of times in that you couldn't ask for a tougher time to be releasing a book. With libraries and bookstores shut down in the face of pandemic, it's really tough to get your book in front of people, and forget about book tours and signings. Now, big names like Stephen King and Suzanne Collins are still selling like gangbusters, but mid-list authors are having to think of whole new ways to hustle in the face of this. The best of times in that Lawrence Wright's fictitious but highly researched thriller is about a novel influenza virus that blooms into a global pandemic. It's timely to the point of being prescient, something that publisher marketing teams are leaning heavily into. And Lawrence Wright has a history of calling it. Back in 1998, he wrote a screenplay for a movie called The Siege. It imagined what radical Islamic terrorism would look like if it came to American shores, specifically New York. Now, the movie bombed in theaters, but it became the most rented movie in the United States some 3 years later after the events of 9/11. It's kind of like how the movie Outbreak is enjoying a bit of a resurgence right now. And Wright just doesn't come up with this stuff out of the blue. He's got some serious researching chops. Back in 2007, he won the Pulitzer for nonfiction for his book on Al-Qaeda and Islamic fundamentalism. And he'd follow that up with an expose on L. Ron Hubbard and Scientology. Here's a guy whose job is to dig deep and build an understanding around a very specific topic. And now Wright has put his intense focus on a global pandemic. Apparently this came about as a result of a conversation he was having with Ridley Scott, who had just finished reading Cormac McCarthy's The Road. He asked Wright what sort of apocalyptic event could drive humanity to the point that McCarthy's novel takes place in, which sent Wright down the path towards researching a pandemic. And now, coming around full circle, Ridley Scott is looking at possibly adapting The End of October into a movie or a series, though weighing that against concerns of it perhaps being a little too soon, considering we're still all on lockdown and facing an uncertain future. So how does the book do? Well, it's set in the spring of 2020 when an unknown virus originating in Asia quickly becomes a global pandemic, overwhelming hospitals, shutting down schools, putting economies into a tailspin, and exposing an ill-prepared American nation. So pretty close so far. There's lots of disinformation and yet another Alex Jones conspiracy plot. And at this point, it is tipping a little too close to home. But it also points out how the information has always been out there, that this hasn't been entirely implausible. From Bill Gates warning against another pandemic 6 years ago to Obama's pandemic game plan 4 years ago. Smart people have been warning against this pandemic for quite some time. And Lawrence Wright has talked to some of the world's most foremost virologists and epidemiologists to build his own plausible pandemic. And that's half the fun, if you can call reading about a global pandemic fun while you're in the midst of a global pandemic. And it hardly seems fair to be docking him points for a couple of his wild swings, considering how much he did get right, and also remembering that he is gaming towards the dystopian hellscape that is Cormac McCarthy's The Road. So yeah, the Congolese flu is named after a refugee camp in Indonesia where it is suspected to have originated. We dock points because the WHO currently insists that we don't name viruses after place names. I keep thinking about the anti-Asian sentiment that's rising throughout North America as a result of some people continuing to refer to it as the Wuhan or the Chinese flu. And the Congolese flu here is way more deadly with a mortality rate of 45%. But again, Wright gets a bit of a pass considering what his end game is. Maybe that elevated mortality rate excuses some of the speculation. In the book, black markets proliferate. One of the characters in the novel trades a string of pearls for a sack of tomatoes and a pound of rigatoni. Here in the real world, we have run on toilet paper and flour. In the book, neighbor turns against neighbor. We have gun-toting looters scouring the suburbs. Meanwhile, here we have gun-toting protesters emerging from lockdown, demanding for their right to get a haircut. In the book, the president is ill-prepared and has a tanning bed installed in the White House, but never once does he deny responsibility or advocate for the injection of bleach or sunlight. The Congolese flu claims the lives of Brad Pitt and Taylor Swift. Meanwhile, COVID-19 prompts a celebrity sing-along and an Ellen DeGeneres backlash. So maybe we're not living in the darkest timeline, just the dumbest. But what about the book? Is it any good? Well, it's certainly a page-turner, but I also wonder if not for the pandemic and the savvy marketing effort, if it would have made the same splash that it did. I mean, it certainly is a page-turner. It's like a Dan Brown on pandemics. Henry Parson, our unlikely hero, is short, stooped, in need of a cane after a childhood bout of rickets. He's overcome his tragic past to become the world's foremost virologist. He's kind of a big deal, traveling the globe in search of disease. In this book alone, he travels by helicopter, private jet, hobnobs with Middle Eastern royalty, rides on a U.S. submarine kitted for war, palling around with a grizzled captain, a former college football star. You know, that sort of thing. And Wright's not just happy with the pandemic. There's a bombing in Rome, rising tensions in the Middle East, a Cold War that's threatening to go nuclear, infrastructure being eliminated across the United States. I mean, it gets grim in spots. So the book, pulpy as all get out, which is sort of a relief. There's always this looming sense of, well, at least we're not that bad off, which is kind of like what it's like to live in Canada and daily hear the reports of how things are being handled in the United States. But where it hits really sort of close to home and gets a little unnerving is this flu-like virus, so meticulously researched and so many elements have gotten right. It kicked off in March. That's not what everyone needed to worry about. It is that second wave that's going to be a killer, that there is precedent in the 1918 Spanish flu, where the first wave in the spring killed 1 million people, but the second wave at the end of October that killed 10 million. Ugh. And in the book, it is stated for us to see the other side of this thing. Every nation on earth has to be involved, whether friends or enemies. If we are to save civilization, we have to fight together, not against each other. So no, I don't think we're destined to see roving bands of cannibals anytime soon, but we're certainly not out of the woods yet. The book can be a grim read at times. I mean, really dark, which is a little jarring considering the matter of fact and frankly flat writing style that's on evidence here for most of it. Still, a page-turner, an airport thriller, something along the lines of a Lee Child or a Tom Clancy. So no, it's not going to help you decide whether you should or should not wear a mask while grocery shopping, or whether that socially distant barbecue is a good idea, but still a great summer read. Well, that's it for me this week. I hope you're all keeping safe, staying sane. Hit me up, tell me what you've been reading lately, what's been good. In the meantime, we'll hopefully talk to you soon.